Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Christine Funner. We are in season 3, where we continue our mission to redefine leadership one amazing story at a time. The Executives Lounge is more than just a podcast. It's a movement. At its core, leadership is about impacting and influencing for the greater good. And this season dives deep into how leaders are making a difference in their communities across the globe. Let's get started. Well, podcast listeners, I am here today with Philip Carr-Gomm, and let me tell you, we're going to explore today how ancient spiritual practices can inform modern leadership, especially for women navigating systems that just weren't built for us. Our guest, Philip Carr-Gomm, is a leading voice in Druidry. That's what I said, Druidry. And he's the author of The Druid Way, Sacred Places, and more. How nature, community, and ancestral wisdom can help us lead with purpose, no matter where we are. And so, Philip, I just want to say thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Well, it was a pleasure. It's lovely to be here with you. Yeah.
Now, 2 questions have come up when I tell people how excited I am to be able to speak with you today. And the first question is, what is Druidry?
Yeah.
And the second question is, oh, wow, I've just started getting into Druidry. So cool. So it's
Uh-huh.
like there's these 2 factions. Either I
Yeah.
know what it is or I don't.
Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, it's going through a kind of real renaissance at the moment. Lots of people are diving into it now. It's a modern day spiritual movement that's inspired by the kind of pre-Christian, indigenous, pagan, animistic practices and beliefs of our sort of forebears in the kind of northwestern part of Europe that we traditionally call Celtic, but also extending outwards. So, from Ireland through all of the British Isles and parts of France and even Portugal and Spain and Germany and so on.
I know from kind of looking through some of your work and watching a few of your podcasts and the things that you have on YouTube that you've really been engaged and become more of an expert in Druidry over the years. And so tell me how your understanding and your practice evolved over the course of several decades.
Yeah, the major kind of theme in that or feature in that. I mean, I was really lucky because I met an old chief druid when I was 11, and then I started training with him when I was 16. So so
Is this
so
like you were like walking through the forest and you found somebody? Like, how
no,
do you
no,
find yourself a mentor like that at such a young age?
yeah, he was a friend of my dad's, and
Cool.
in London, but I was always interested in psychology too. I was interested in the world, and my dad knew a lot of psychoanalysts too, and he knew the president of the Buddhist Society in London. So I was kind of all these influences were going around when I was a kid. I read the life of the Buddha when I was really young, and the idea of the quest for enlightenment, it seemed so wise and such an appropriate direction to take. And so I was interested in these themes. And for me, what I've done is I've woven together my interest in psychology and in sort of nature-based spirituality and put them together. I think spiritual psychology, transpersonal psychology, is hugely helpful in understanding a spiritual path. And when you combine the two, it's a fantastic combination. That's been the kind of work, I suppose, that I've been engaged in.
Mhm. I talk a lot about practice on this podcast and what practice really is. And it's kind of, action and philosophy or strategy and ethos. It's intentionally being and doing what you
Mm,
believe and what you know. And so,
mm,
what I love about this podcast is that it's really evolved over the last 3 seasons. The first season, we really focused just on women in leadership and the
mm,
barriers that we face and some of the challenges, and then really the amazing stories of who we are and
mm,
bringing in that whole person idea. Then the second season was really about redefining leadership. like recognizing that the language and the experiences have really been very narrowly taught to us, and we've narrowly experienced what leadership is. So we
Mm,
started redefining it. And this season, season 3, we've really been about reclaiming language and reclaiming leadership and really starting to talk about community and belonging and what practice really is. When you talk about this holistic view of transpersonal psychology,
mm,
and so I'd
mm,
love for you to chat about that a little bit, about how over the years you've been redefining your own practice
mm.
and how that's active in your daily life.
If I talk about, leadership as use that as a kind of way into this as well. The group that I was asked to lead, I led for 32 years, and we went from about a dozen people to 30,000. I mean, a huge. So it was over those 30 years, and that was because I developed a training program um, that could be delivered initially by mail and then online, and that made the huge difference because when I was young at the beginning, you could only train by actually visiting somebody, and so the huge physical constraints around that. Um, so over those 30 years, it grew incredibly, and then I had this real sense about it's probably about 6 years ago now that it was time to hand on the role, and in a succession plan that didn't involve, often leaders of spiritual groups keep going till they die, and then there's a kind of struggle and it's a mess and of who takes over and all the rest of it. So I wanted to do it ahead of my demise and really plan it and do it smoothly. And I handed it over to a woman, to Emma Burke, who's a wonderful. She's also a psychologist in Ireland, and that's been really successful. If you have a sort of spiritual worldview and a practice and a discipline that is all about kind of finding wholeness and connecting to the natural world, that naturally leads you in the direction of, I don't know what the business speak for this is, sort of flat management or something like that. I don't know. But you into community. It's all the
Mhm.
natural world is all about community. When you
And
start
connectivity, I think,
and
right?
connectivity, yeah,
Hmm.
you look at the trees and you think these trees are fantastic, and then you realize they're working in community together with the mycorrhizal system underneath the mycelium, and everybody's talking to each other, everybody's connected, everybody's helping each other in the forest, but it all fits. So there's this communication and connection. And so, right from the beginning, we conceived of the model of leadership for our group as one in which the leaders were kind of underneath the group rather than above it. So we have the membership, so you have thousands of people, but we always conceived ourselves below the membership in a kind of supporting role rather than above. That was a sort of key orientation for us. Um,
Well, and I think bringing it back to the trees. I mean, you see these big, tall, powerful, strong, beautiful trees, and there's so much more going on underneath, and that root system is really what anchors it all together. I also wanted to chat about when we first chatted together, we really talked about that fine line between true leadership and cultivating community and space for people to be together, grow together, learn together, support each other, and cults.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there and I think there's a fine line between cultivating community around common belief systems and common activities and what we see in documentaries, which is
yeah.
real power dynamics going awry.
Well, yeah, yeah, it's a fascinating area. And, one of the best educations I had, I think, was I trained with my Druid teacher from the age of 16 until for about 7 years until he died. And towards the end of his life, I came across a guru. He was a Bulgarian guru who was teaching in Paris, and he was very charismatic. And I started following him, and I followed him for 7 years as well. And in the end, the kind of dynamics in the group became cultish, and it became really uncomfortable, and I just knew that I had to leave. It was then that I decided to take a degree in psychology and train in psychoanalysis and all the rest of it, because I could see that, something really odd was going on, and I wanted to know more. And I'd already been inspired by it through my childhood with my dad knowing so many psychologists. And what I realized in the end was that my Druid teacher, he was a mentor, and he was not charismatic. He was just like a kind of school teacher type. He taught me. The guru was very charismatic, so there was a lot of razzmatazz. Um, but in the end, I realized that culture is more important than charisma. And that's what I
Mm.
wrote in when I wrote a biography of my Druid teacher. I came up with this phrase, and I realized that culture was more important than charisma. My Druid teacher was really cultured. He knew a lot about literature, about art, poetry, and so on. And that genre of documentaries that I find so fascinating,
It's so fascinating. You and I talked a lot about this when we first met because, like, the behavioral science behind decision making and charisma and following and leading is just fascinating when it goes
when it
really
goes
awry.
when it goes right, it's a bit like, that's why we get interested in, say, if you're studying psychology, you get interested in psychopathology, you get interested in the kind of crazy stuff. When something goes wrong,
Yeah.
that's when you get a chance to look at it. So there, I'm fascinated by those programs. A Wild
Mhm.
Wild Country that started off to looking at the Osho movement, for instance, fantastic three-part documentary, and they keep coming out. I mean, there are lots of them now. And and I ask myself, and I've had fantastic discussions with members of our group about this as well, because sometimes people who've been in cults come to our group and they say, "Oh my God, this is like a breath of fresh air. This is so nice," and you know, because we all want and need guidance. I think. I mean, it's just lovely to be able to turn to somebody who is a mentor figure, and in the sort of leadership world that you're in, I mean, that's really valuable. Um,
Well, and
you know,
recognizing too, as a mentor, you're helping bring others with you and bring others
yeah,
up into wisdom and knowledge and capability and impact. It's really a passion place for a lot of us that have chosen this as a career space.
yeah, yeah. It's a
Hmm.
way what at the deepest level, I think it's the way we manifest our love. Our love. At the heart. The heart of us is the heart of our souls is love, and we either want to create something beautiful, we become artists, or we want to teach or become mentors, or we want to heal and become doctors or nurses, or there's a way we show our love and care for people. And so, I mean, we have a team of 50 mentors, actually more now, I think about 70 around the world. And so we matched students with mentors. And there's a whole different relationship between a mentor and a student than between a guru and a disciple, if you like. And what's happening, I think, with the guru pattern is, of course, this massive projection of the father, the good father on or mother onto the
Hmm.
figure. And often our parenting perhaps wasn't the best, and we may, often kind of absent fathering is a very common experience in people, either absent physically or just absent emotionally. In that genre of guru films, there's a great one on a guy who called himself the father. I've forgotten the name now. I think it's called The Family or something. And he said he said everybody's looking for a father, and I'm doing it for them. You know, and
Hmm.
or a mother in the case of female gurus, of course.
Right, we
Um,
talked about Guru Jagat a little bit in
yeah,
our first meeting, that
that's
she
right.
was she was like this badass boss lady and like doing really cool stuff, and everybody was like, "Wow, look at this woman leader," and that went
And
awry.
and that went
Mm-hmm.
awry. And if you look at what she was doing there, one of the qualities she conveyed was certainty.
Mm.
Certainty. And because the world is so uncertain around us, and that
Yeah.
if you're kind of sensitive or indeed intelligent, uncertainty is a kind of really sensible position to be in. Like if somebody could ask me a whole load of questions about things, and I'd say, I don't know, I'm not sure. There's lots of stuff I'm not sure about,
Mm-hmm.
and you need more information, you need to think about it, and so that's a kind of mature approach. But people want certainty. That's why, if I dare to mention, Mr. Trump, that's why people, are attracted to him because he's certain.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who's a New York lawyer who's very successful and kind of charismatic too, actually. He talked about a formative experience when he was working in LA, and he was following his mentor, and the mentor he went into a client meeting, and the lawyer who was his mentor said to the client, you've got two options, A or B. My advice is for you to go for A, like that. And so the client said, thank you. And they walked out. And my friend said, why did you say A when B was, it's like not clear? And he said, because that's what they pay us for. They pay us for certainty. They want to be,
Mm.
it's really scary to be uncertain. Often any decision is better than no decision.
When we watch those documentaries, my husband and I end up talking about, because he finds these fascinating too.
Yeah.
He and I end up talking a lot about how people are always just looking for some type of sense of belonging,
Mm,
which, kind of connects to some of my PhD work that I've done in looking at motivators of human experience. And as we were talking about, like love is at the center, but
mm.
people are looking and craving that sense of belonging. And so they're looking for space for community. And I think sometimes when you're vulnerable and desiring belonging, that's where you can find yourself in places where people can take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And if you look at the studies on the value for mental health of spiritual and religious communities, it's really strong that there are very clear positive benefits of spiritual and religious affiliations. And one of the reasons why is because it provides that sense of community and belonging, you know. But as you say, if in the wrong group and in the wrong place, it can be exploited.
What I'm finding is as I'm busting out of the walls of the executives lounge in this podcast in season 3, we're talking about spirituality. We're talking about the unexplainable. We're talking about who we are without always that tangible evidence. I'd love for you to speak to, combining or merging your belief system around, say, the science of psychology or the science of energy or the evidence that we have that's
Mm,
really fascinating, right? And critical analysis of the unexplainable.
yeah. Well, if you take exactly that process of the ability to be analytical, clear, defined, which is such an asset in the business world. When you combine it with an ability to be open, to listen to people, to hear new ideas, to encourage cross-fertilization, all the rest of it, you've got this perfect combination. And in fact, if you kind of dig down into this, it becomes really fascinating. And this is one of the links between the business world and the leadership world and this spiritual world that we're talking about. It's very clear. And it goes like this. If you look at highly successful people and highly creative people, you'll find they have a range of abilities, but at the heart are the abilities to be focused and the abilities to be open. So the ability to be both. It seems paradoxical, but they combine both. And people who are overly focused become rigid, and they have rigid think, and they can't think outside the box. They can't, contemplate different ways of operating and so on. And they're not open to new feelings, and their relational skills tend to be poor and so on. They might be really good at analysis and planning and all that, but so they're lacking in some way. If somebody's overly open and not developed on the other side, then they can be all over the place and ineffective because they can't action anything. So you bring the two together, and you have people who are creative and able to, achieve well and perform well and so on. And so you look at that fact, which psychology has explored, and then you say, hang on a minute, these people are using capacities which are talked about in spiritual language in a different way. I mean, the perhaps the most sort of graphic example is talking about yin and yang. Uh,
Mhm.
in Druidry, we talk about the chalice and the blade, the Holy Grail and Excalibur. The business to be incisive, specific, particular, and the ability to be receptive. Up until a few years ago, we would talk about these as feminine and masculine qualities. Now it's kind of got complicated assigning stuff to gender, and it's kind of probably easier just not even to bring that in. But traditionally, these were associated with feminine and masculine qualities. And we can talk about left brain and right brain as well. That's another
Mhm.
way of looking at it. If you can cultivate that, I mean, it works at every single level. Say you're explaining to people in the business world that meditation, might be an effective strategy for them to deal with stress, for them to kind of center themselves and find more alignment with their values. But you can also explain to them that actually you're working with precisely those two abilities. You have to be able to focus. You have to have the discipline to do it for a start. You have to be able to focus your mind, whether it's on a mantra or a guided visualization or whatever. And then you need the ability to just let go. Once the plane's got up to the altitude it needs to be at, you just let go. I mean, effective meditation, not all meditation systems use this, but the way we use meditation is we will use focused attention to get to a certain point, and then you drop into the silence where you're just in tune, and then you open up, and then you can receive inspiration and new ideas and a kind of nourishment of the soul at some level that goes beyond word.
Druidry teaches resilience through connecting to nature's cycles.
Mm.
How can we share this with my listeners in a way that they might be able to take something away for their own daily practice?
One way is to start off with that very common experience of realizing that you haven't connected with nature enough. It's very easy to live in boxes.
Mm.
You wake up in the box of your bedroom and you open a box of cereal and tip it into a bowl, and then you get in the metal box and drive to a glass box where you work,
I've never thought of it that way. That's
and then you look at a
so
box
true.
and you get back in the box, go back to your box, and then how do you relax? Well, you
You
switch,
watch the box.
you watch the box, and then you finally get carried out in a box at the end of it all. It's kind of scary. So how do you get out of the box? You get outside and you connect with nature, and one way to start is I had a very moving kind of interview with a guy in New York actually who had so many allergies he couldn't go outside. He was kind of confined to his
Mm.
his apartment because of his allergies. And he reminded me of something I knew already, which is so powerful, which is that the nervous system can't distinguish between fantasy and reality.
That our bodies don't know the difference between a bear chasing us or an Excel spreadsheet getting the best of us. It
Yeah,
doesn't know the difference.
it doesn't know the
Mhm.
difference. Even getting into nature in your head can be hugely helpful. I mean,
Mm.
that's what I do a thing every Monday called Tea with a Druid, which is a little
Yeah, I love
half
watching
hour.
that.
And I just kind of chat with everybody for 10, 15 minutes, and then we do a meditation, and we go into the forest and we breathe in you know the aroma of the trees and soak in the sunshine and all the rest of it. It can be incredibly sort of soothing, and I had a vivid example of that when I was training in a particular method I use called sophrology, which is a way of working with the nervous system. And for 2 weeks I had to every day go into this. They have a way of getting you into a kind of deep state, And then imagine you're lying on a beach, soaking up the sun and listening to the sea. And there's a particular beach that my wife and I used to go to in Barbados that's always kind of deserted and the classic Caribbean beach, gorgeous and all that. And I did that for 2 weeks, and it was just fabulous. And then we happened to be flying there, and we went there. And so suddenly, after spending 2 weeks of lying on this beach, I was actually physically lying on it. So I was lying there, and I couldn't help laughing as I lay there with my eyes closed because it was a tiny bit too hot. There was these insects buzzing around, and there was some guy in a boat making a noise on the water, which I hadn't had when I was doing it for 2 weeks back at home. I didn't have the boat or the insects, and it was just the right temperature. So all this to say, you can get a lot of mileage out of
Yeah.
working, at home with this.
I've been thinking about how much time you've dedicated to gaining ancient wisdom, learning and gaining knowledge and having mentors and really exploring all of these different aspects of the human being. If you were to think about your legacy
Hmm,
and what you want to make sure people continue to receive from you forever,
hmm.
what might that be?
Well, I mean, I suppose because what I do is I essentially I write books.
Mhm.
I do kind of online. I speak online, workshops and talks, and this tea with a Druid thing and so on, and interview people as well, like you. And whenever I write a book, I guess a part of me might be thinking in terms of legacy, like, because
Mm.
whatever I do, I want it to be of value and of use to people and to help people. And that
Well, you're
I know,
touching on something really important that, our words are so powerful, and the way we make meaning in the world
hmm,
is through language
hmm,
and sharing our
sharing.
experiences and sharing our knowledge through language. That's pretty powerful to think about.
That question, what would you do if you only had 6 months left? The answer always comes back the same to me, which is I would carry on doing exactly what I'm doing. And there are various books that I still want to write
Mhm.
and courses that I want. I do online courses as well that I want to create. And the kind of broadcasts that I do. It's the same thing. And it's just about I suppose I know the way we love a quotation. If somebody
Mhm.
you read a really great quotation, and that's why you see them on Instagram and you see them in books and you see them, because you can encapsulate a whole idea in just a few words, and that can be like a seed that can trigger, all sorts of changes in you. And so I think that's so powerful. I love that. And so I would just hope that in terms of legacy, that particular way I express certain ideas and put certain ideas together and so on is of use, really.
I feel like there's quite a few takeaways that we're going to have today.
It's a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking with you, Christine. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on the Executives Lounge and the latest episode. You can find more information about Christine Fauner at christinefauner.com. And you can find more podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple, the website christinefauner.com/podcast, or LinkedIn.